Late autumn rain tapped softly against the classroom windows, while the students inside the music building prepared for rehearsal. The old hall smelled of wood, paper, and piano polish. Some students laughed together near the back row, while others nervously practiced scales on silent keyboards placed along the walls. In the center of the room stood a large black piano under the yellow ceiling lights. That piano was the only thing Jian truly cared about anymore. She sat quietly on the bench with her fingers resting on the keys. Her dark hair partly covered her face as she stared down at the piano instead of the people around her. The other students had known her for years, but after her mother died 8 months earlier, she became almost invisible at school. She no longer joined conversations. She no longer smiled in the hallways. Most days, she spoke only when teachers called her name. The only place where she still seemed alive was in front of the piano. "Everyone ready?" Mr. Jian's sharp voice filled the room. The students immediately straightened up. Nobody wanted to disappoint him. Mr. Jian was known as the strictest music teacher in the district. He believed discipline mattered more than talent. Every note had to be perfect. Every movement had to be controlled. He often said emotions ruined performances. Jian quietly adjusted the sheet music in front of her. Mr. Jian crossed his arms and looked around the room. The city youth concert is only 3 weeks away. If anyone embarrasses the school, they can forget about performing again. The room became silent. One by one, students practiced short sections of the concert piece. Some played well. Others made mistakes and immediately received criticism from Mr. Jian. His words were never gentle. "Too slow. Wrong timing. You sound half asleep." Jian waited quietly for her turn. Her fingers felt cold even though the room was warm. She had barely slept the night before. The same dream kept returning every night. Her mother sitting beside her at the piano, humming softly while sunlight came through the apartment window. "Jian," Mr. Jian said suddenly. "You're next." She nodded and slowly placed both hands on the piano keys. At first, the melody flowed softly through the room. The sound was delicate and emotional, different from the other students playing. Even a few classmates turned toward her in surprise. Jian always played beautifully when she forgot people were watching. Mr. Jian listened carefully. The melody continued, gentle and sad. Then something changed. Jian's breathing became uneven. Her fingers trembled slightly against the keys. A painful memory flashed through her mind without warning. A hospital room. Her mother's weak smile. The sound of machines beside the bed. "Play it again for me," her mother had whispered back then. Jian suddenly missed a note. The mistake echoed loudly in the silent room. She froze. Her chest tightened as tears quickly filled her eyes. She tried to continue playing, but the notes blurred together. Her vision became cloudy. Before she could stop herself, tears rolled down her cheeks and landed on the piano keys. A few students looked uncomfortable. Others lowered their eyes. Jian wiped her face quickly, embarrassed, but the tears would not stop. Then came Mr. Jian's cold voice. Again. The room stayed silent. He walked closer to the piano, clearly annoyed. "This is a rehearsal, not a drama performance." Jian lowered her head. Mr. Jian sighed heavily. "If you can't control your emotions, you shouldn't be sitting at the piano." His words hit harder than she expected. Some students exchanged nervous looks, but nobody spoke. Mr. Jian continued, his voice calm but sharp. "Crying won't improve your music. Audiences don't pay to watch tears." Jian felt heat rise to her face. Her hands shook in her lap. She wanted to disappear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But Mr. Jian was already turning away. Next student. That single moment shattered something inside her. Jian quickly gathered her music sheets while trying not to cry harder in front of everyone. One paper slipped from her folder and fell near the piano bench, but she didn't notice. Her mind was spinning too fast. Without looking at anyone, she rushed out of the room. The hallway outside felt cold and empty. Her breathing became heavier as she leaned against the wall near the staircase. She covered her mouth to stop herself from sobbing loudly. She hated crying in public. Her mother used to tell her tears were nothing to be ashamed of. But now every tear only made her feel weak. Inside the classroom, the rehearsal continued like nothing had happened. Yet something felt strange afterward. Even the students seemed distracted. A quiet girl named Minacio glanced toward the empty doorway where Jian had disappeared. Teacher. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. Mr. Jian adjusted some sheet music. Professional musicians perform through pain. Nobody answered him after that. The rest of rehearsal passed in uncomfortable silence. Hours later, evening darkness covered the school grounds. Most students had already gone home. Mr. Jian remained alone in the music room organizing papers before leaving. As he walked past the piano, he noticed several handwritten sheets lying beside the bench. He picked them up carelessly at first, assuming they belonged to the concert music. But when he looked closer, he realized the notes were different. This was not the school performance piece. The pages were filled with handwritten melodies, corrections, and small personal notes written carefully in blue ink. Some parts looked old while others appeared newer. Mr. Jian frowned slightly. At the top of the first page was a title. For Mom. He stared at the words for a moment. The melody written across the pages looked emotional and unusually advanced for a student her age. There were small stains on parts of the paper, almost like watermarks from old tears. He flipped through more pages. Near the corner of one sheet, tiny handwriting caught his attention. Finish this song someday, my little star. The sentence looked different from the rest of the writing. Older, softer, almost motherly. Mr. Jian slowly sat down on the piano bench. For the first time that day, uncertainty crossed his face. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. He glanced toward the empty doorway again. Then he looked back at the music pages resting in his hands. Without meaning to, he placed the sheets on the stand and lightly pressed a few keys on the piano. A soft melody filled the room. Simple, beautiful, painfully emotional. Mr. Jian stopped after only a few notes. He suddenly remembered the tears on Jian's face, the trembling in her hands, the way she looked completely broken while trying to keep playing. He leaned back silently. For years, he had trained students to hide emotions and focus only on perfection. Weakness, fear, sadness. He believed none of those belonged on stage. But this song felt different. It did not sound weak at all. It sounded real. Mr. Jian closed the notebook slowly and slipped the pages back together. For a long moment, he simply sat there in silence while rain tapped softly against the dark windows. Meanwhile, several streets away, Jian sat alone beside the piano in her apartment living room. The room was small and quiet. A framed picture of her mother rested on top of the piano beside a dying white flower. Jian stared at it silently. She remembered how her mother used to sing while cooking dinner. She remembered late nights practicing together. She remembered promises they made to finish songs side by side one day. Now the apartment only felt empty. Her father was still working late, leaving her alone with memories again. Slowly, Jian touched the piano keys. The same unfinished melody filled the room softly. This time, she allowed herself to cry freely. No classmates, no teacher, no judgment. Only her music and the memory of the person she missed most in the world. As the melody continued through the quiet apartment, Jian whispered softly through tears. I'm trying, Mom. Morning sunlight slowly entered the apartment through thin curtains, but Jian had already been awake for hours. She sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched bowl of soup in front of her. The house felt too silent again. Every corner reminded her of her mother. Her father moved carefully around the kitchen while getting ready for work. He looked tired lately. Deep lines had formed under his eyes during the past few months, though he always tried to hide his pain from Jian. You should eat something, he said gently. Jian nodded but did not lift the spoon. Her father noticed the sadness in her face immediately. Rough rehearsal yesterday? She looked down at the table. I don't want to talk about it. He wanted to ask more, but he knew pushing her never helped. Since her mother passed away, Jian carried most of her pain silently. Even when she cried, she tried to do it alone. Before leaving, her father placed a small lunchbox beside her bag. "Don't skip lunch again," he said softly. After he left, the apartment became quiet once more. Jian slowly walked toward the piano in the living room. The framed photo of her mother still rested on top beside old music books and dried flowers. She touched the picture carefully. "I messed up again," she whispered. For a moment, she almost expected her mother to answer with a smile like before, but only silence filled the room. Jian sat at the piano bench and opened the notebook containing the unfinished song. Some pages looked worn from being touched so many times. Her mother's handwriting appeared between the music notes here and there, like small memories left behind. "Add softer notes here. This part should sound like rain. Don't rush the feeling." Jian traced the words gently with her fingertips. Then she closed the notebook quickly before tears could fall again. At school later that morning, students crowded the hallways while talking excitedly about the upcoming city concert. Jian kept her head lowered as she walked toward class. She could already feel people glancing at her after what happened during rehearsal. Whispers followed behind her. Did she really cry in front of everyone? Mr. Jian was so angry. She ran out so fast. Jian tightened her grip on her bag and walked faster. Inside the music room, students prepared for another rehearsal. The sound of instruments filled the space, but conversations quieted slightly when Jian entered. She immediately moved toward the back corner of the room without making eye contact with anyone. Minacio carefully approached her a few minutes later. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Jian forced a small nod. "I'm fine," but Minacio could tell she was lying. Before she could say more, Mr. Jian entered the room carrying several music folders. His expression remained serious as always. "Take your seats." Everyone obeyed immediately. Jian felt nervous the moment his eyes briefly passed over her. But surprisingly, he said nothing about yesterday. Still, the memory remained heavy between them. The rehearsal began again. Students practiced difficult sections while Mr. Jian corrected mistakes sharply, but his attention seemed distracted today. Several times, he glanced toward Jian without speaking. The handwritten song pages stayed in his office drawer downstairs. He had looked at them again late last night before going home. Something about that melody continued bothering him. During a short break, Jian quietly packed her books, planning to leave the room for fresh air. But as she reached the doorway, Mr. Jian suddenly spoke. "Jian, stay for a moment." The room became awkwardly silent again. Jian slowly stopped walking. The other students exchanged curious looks before leaving one by one. Soon only the two of them remained inside the music room. Jian stood near the door without turning around fully. Mr. Jian cleared his throat. "You forgot something yesterday." He walked toward the piano and handed her the music pages. The moment Jian saw the notebook, panic flashed across her face. "You read it?" she asked quietly. Mr. Jian hesitated for a second. "I needed to identify the owner." Jian lowered her eyes. She carefully took the pages back and held them tightly against her chest. For some reason, Mr. Jian suddenly felt uncomfortable. He was not used to emotional conversations. "The composition is advanced," he finally said. Jian looked surprised by the comment. Most people at school had never heard her personal music before. "It's unfinished," she murmured. Mr. Jian studied her face for a moment. The dark circles under her eyes, the quiet sadness she constantly carried, the way she looked ready to apologize even when standing silently. Then his eyes landed briefly on the notebook again. "That note written in the corner," he said carefully. "Who wrote it?" Jian froze. Her fingers tightened around the pages. "My mother," she answered softly. The room became silent again. Mr. Jian looked away first. "I see." Jian quickly bowed slightly. "Thank you for returning it." Then she hurried out before he could ask anything else. Mr. Jian remained standing beside the piano after she left. Something about her voice when she said, "my mother," stayed in his mind long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, Jian sat alone on the school rooftop during lunch break. Cold wind brushed through her hair while she stared at the cloudy sky. She often came here to avoid crowded places. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from her father appeared. "Working late again tonight. Sorry. Don't forget dinner." Jian typed a short reply and put the phone away. Then she opened the notebook once more. The unfinished song meant more to her than anyone knew. Years earlier, her mother had started composing it during long hospital visits. Whenever treatments became painful, music helped distract her. She used to smile weakly while writing melodies beside the hospital window. "One day we'll finish it together," she would say. But that day never came. After her mother's death, Jian secretly spent nights trying to complete the song alone. Every note felt connected to a memory. Some parts sounded warm like childhood mornings. Some sounded lonely like hospital hallways at night. And some parts hurt too much to play at all. A tear slipped down Jian's cheek as she looked at the pages. She quickly wiped it away before anyone could see. Back inside the building, Mr. Jian sat in the teacher's office reviewing performance schedules, but his concentration kept breaking. Finally, another music teacher named Ms. Hay entered carrying coffee. "You look troubled," she said lightly. Mr. Jian scoffed quietly. "I'm fine." Ms. Hay smiled knowingly. "This about Jian?" He looked up immediately. "What do you know about her?" Ms. Hay's expression softened. "Not many students had it easy this year," she said while sitting down. "But that girl, she changed after her mother died." Mr. Jian remained silent. "She used to smile all the time," Ms. Hay continued. "Her mother came to every school performance. They were very close." Mr. Jian listened quietly. "She stopped talking much after the funeral," Ms. Hay added. "But she never stopped playing piano." For some reason, guilt slowly began pressing heavier inside him. He remembered every harsh word he said during rehearsal. "This is a rehearsal, not a drama performance. If you can't control your emotions, you shouldn't be sitting at the piano." At the time, he believed he was teaching discipline. Now the words sounded colder in his memory. That evening, rain began falling again while Jian returned home through crowded streets. The city lights reflected across wet sidewalks as people hurried past holding umbrellas. When she entered the apartment, darkness greeted her. Her father still had not returned from work. Jian quietly heated leftover soup before carrying the bowl toward the piano instead of the dining table. She sat down slowly. The room felt lonely again. After a few moments, she opened the notebook and began playing softly. The melody filled the apartment like a conversation from another lifetime. As Jian played, memories returned one by one. Her mother laughing while missing notes on purpose. Warm tea beside the piano during winter nights. Soft humming from the kitchen. "Music should tell the truth," her mother once said. Jian closed her eyes while continuing the melody. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks again, but this time she kept playing through them. Far away across the city, Mr. Jian sat alone in his office after school hours ended. The building was almost empty now. Without fully understanding why, he opened the drawer once more and pulled out a copied page of Jian's composition he had quickly photocopied earlier before returning the original. He stared at the notes silently. Then, very carefully, he pressed a few piano keys nearby. The melody echoed softly through the dark room. For the first time in many years, Mr. Jian did not hear weakness in emotional music. He heard grief, real grief, and suddenly he was no longer certain he had been teaching his students the right way at all. The days after the rehearsal incident became strangely quiet for Jian. She still attended classes, still carried her music books through the crowded hallways, and still sat in the same corner seat during practice. But something inside her had changed. She no longer touched the piano during rehearsals. Whenever Mr. Jian asked students to practice individually, Jian would quietly say she was not feeling well or pretend to organize sheet music instead. At first, nobody questioned it. But after several days, even the other students noticed. "She hasn't played once this week," Minicio whispered during lunch. Another student nodded carefully. "I think she might quit the concert." Jian overheard the conversation but kept walking without reacting. The truth was much worse. She was thinking about quitting piano completely. Every time she looked at the keys now, she remembered the embarrassment from that day. Mr. Giant's words still echoed painfully in her mind. If you can't control your emotions, you shouldn't be sitting at the piano. At night, she replayed those words again and again until they felt impossible to ignore. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was too emotional. Maybe she did not belong on stage anymore. One rainy evening, Jian sat alone in her bedroom staring at the city lights outside her window. Her piano notebook rested unopened beside her. Usually she practiced every night, even when exhausted. But recently she could barely force herself to touch the keys. A soft knock came at the door. Her father stepped inside carefully while holding 2 cups of warm tea. "You didn't practice tonight," he said gently. Jian shrugged slightly. He sat beside her quietly for a moment before speaking again. "Did something happen at school?" She stayed silent. Her father sighed softly. "Jian, you know you don't have to carry everything alone." For a second, her eyes filled with tears again, but she quickly looked away. "I'm tired," she whispered. Her father looked at the unopened notebook on the desk. "She would hate seeing you give up music." Jian's face tightened immediately. "Please don't," she said quietly. He understood right away. Talking about her mother still hurt too deeply sometimes. So instead, he simply placed one hand gently on her shoulder before leaving the room. After the door closed, Jian slowly opened the notebook again. The unfinished melody stared back at her from the pages. She remembered sitting beside her mother in the hospital months ago. Even during painful treatment days, her mother always carried music paper everywhere. "You know why I love piano?" her mother once asked with a weak smile. Jian shook her head back then. "Because music says things people cannot explain." At the time, Jian did not fully understand those words. Now she understood them too well. Meanwhile at school, Mr. Jian noticed Jian's silence more each day. During rehearsal that afternoon, the empty piano bench bothered him more than it should have. "Jian," he finally said during practice, "play the second section." Jian froze slightly. Every student in the room turned toward her. Slowly, she stood from her seat and walked toward the piano. Her movements looked hesitant now, nothing like before. She sat down carefully. Her fingers rested above the keys. The room waited, but after several long seconds, she quietly pulled her hands away. "I can't," she whispered. Mr. Jian frowned. "What do you mean you can't?" Jian lowered her head. "I just can't." The room became painfully silent. Mr. Jian wanted to respond sharply like before. He almost did, but something stopped him. Instead, he simply looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. "Sit down." Jian immediately returned to her seat without another word. The rehearsal continued, but concentration had already disappeared from the room. Even the students sensed something deeper was happening. That evening, long after school ended, Mr. Jian remained alone in the music hall once again. Rain tapped against the windows while the building grew darker around him. He walked slowly past the piano. Then he stopped. Without fully thinking about it, he sat down at the bench and placed Jian's copied composition pages in front of him again. For several minutes, he stared silently at the notes. Then he began to play. The melody filled the empty hall softly. Unlike competition music, this piece carried emotion in every note. Some sections sounded warm and comforting. Others sounded painfully lonely. As Mr. Jian continued playing, he suddenly noticed something. The melody changed halfway through. The earlier sections felt like 2 people speaking together. But later parts sounded emptier, lonelier, as if one voice had disappeared. His fingers slowed. For the first time, he realized this song was telling a story. And suddenly, he needed to understand it. The next afternoon, Mr. Jian made an unusual decision. After classes ended, he searched through student records until he found Jian's home address. Even while writing it down, he questioned himself. Why was he doing this? He was not the type of teacher who visited students' homes. He rarely involved himself in personal matters. Music was music. Feelings stayed outside the classroom. That had always been his rule. Yet something about Jian's composition refused to leave his mind. By evening, he found himself standing outside an older apartment building beneath cloudy skies. For several seconds, he simply stared upward uncertainly. Then, before he could knock on the apartment door, soft piano music drifted through a slightly open window nearby. Mr. Jian froze. It was Jian. The melody floated gently into the evening air. But hearing it now felt completely different from hearing it during rehearsal. There were no audiences, no judges, no pressure, only raw emotion. Mr. Jian stood silently beneath the window while Jian continued playing inside. The music sounded fragile at first, almost like someone speaking through tears. Then slowly, the melody grew stronger, warmer, filled with memories and longing. Without meaning to, Mr. Jian felt his chest tighten. The music did not sound weak. It sounded honest. Then suddenly the melody stopped. A quiet voice spoke inside the apartment. Jian, her father. Mr. Jian stepped back awkwardly, realizing he should not be standing there listening. A moment later, the apartment door opened downstairs as Jian's father came outside carrying trash bags. He noticed Mr. Jian immediately. "Oh," he said in surprise. "Can I help you?" Mr. Jian bowed politely. "I'm Jian's music teacher." Recognition crossed the man's face quickly. "You're Mr. Jian." There was no anger in his voice, but Mr. Jian still felt uncomfortable. "I came to discuss the concert," he explained. Jian's father looked toward the apartment window for a moment before nodding slowly. "She's having a difficult time lately." Mr. Jian stayed silent. Her father gave a tired smile. "Honestly, piano is the only thing keeping her together these days." Those words hit harder than expected. The two men stood quietly beneath the dim apartment lights while rainwater dripped softly nearby. Finally, Jian's father spoke again. "You heard the song, didn't you?" Mr. Jian hesitated before answering honestly. "Yes." The man looked back toward the glowing apartment window upstairs. "Her mother started writing that piece during treatment," he said softly. "Whenever things became painful, she would work on it little by little." Mr. Jian listened carefully. "She wanted to finish it with Jian someday," her father continued. "But near the end, she became too weak." His voice grew quieter. After the funeral, Jian locked herself in that room every night trying to complete the song alone. Mr. Jian felt completely still. The cold evening air suddenly seemed heavier around him. "She cried while writing most of it," her father admitted gently. "But she kept saying she wanted her mother's music to stay alive somehow." For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Mr. Jian remembered every harsh word from rehearsal again. "This is not a drama performance. Audience members don't pay to watch tears." Now those words felt unbearable. He imagined Jian sitting alone night after night, pouring grief into music while trying to finish something her mother never could. And he had mocked her for crying. A deep feeling of shame settled inside him. Upstairs, the piano melody began softly once more. This time Mr. Jian listened differently. Not as a teacher judging technique. Not as a strict instructor demanding perfection. But as someone finally hearing another person's pain. And for the first time in many years, Mr. Jian realized music was never only about perfect notes. Sometimes it was about surviving loss. Mr. Jian barely slept that night. The melody from Jian's piano stayed trapped inside his mind long after he returned home. Every note carried emotion he could no longer ignore. He sat alone in his apartment near midnight, staring at old music trophies lining the shelves beside his desk. Years ago, those trophies meant everything to him. Now they only looked cold. Rain tapped softly against the windows while memories he had buried for years slowly returned. He remembered being young and standing beside a hospital bed himself. Not as a teacher, not as a strict musician, just as an older brother watching someone he loved disappear little by little. His younger sister had loved singing when they were children. She used to follow him around the house humming songs while he practiced piano. But after a long illness took her away, Mr. Jian changed completely. Back then, he cried openly for weeks. until one day his own teacher told him something he never forgot. Pain makes musicians weak. Those words became the rule he lived by for years. He forced himself to stop crying, stop talking about loss, stop feeling. Over time, discipline became easier than emotion. Perfect notes became safer than honest ones. And without realizing it, he began teaching students the same cold way he had been taught. Now, after hearing Jian's story, he finally understood how much damage those beliefs could cause. Mr. Jian leaned back slowly and closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, guilt felt heavier than pride. The next morning, the school hallways buzzed with noise as students rushed between classes. Nothing looked different from outside, but Jian still carried sadness everywhere she went. She had stopped expecting kindness from people. Most days, she simply tried to survive school quietly and return home as fast as possible. As she entered the music room that afternoon, conversations immediately softened around her again. Everyone remembered the rehearsal incident. Jian walked silently toward her usual seat in the corner. A few minutes later, Mr. Jian entered carrying music folders. The room quickly became silent. Normally he started rehearsals immediately without wasting time. But today he stood unusually still near the front of the room. His face looked serious, though something about his expression felt different. The students waited quietly. Then Mr. Jian spoke. "Before rehearsal begins, I need to say something." Several students exchanged confused looks. Mr. Jian rarely explained himself to anyone. His eyes slowly moved across the room before stopping on Jian. She immediately looked nervous. For a moment, even Mr. Jian seemed unsure how to continue. Then he took a slow breath. "What I said during rehearsal last week was wrong." The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody even whispered. Jian looked up in shock. Mr. Jian continued carefully, his voice quieter than usual. "I spoke without understanding someone else's pain. I embarrassed a student in front of others when I should have shown compassion instead." The silence became even heavier. Some students looked genuinely stunned. They had never once heard Mr. Jian apologize before. He bowed his head slightly. "Jian, I am sorry." Jian stared at him without speaking. Part of her wanted to believe the apology. Another part still remembered the humiliation too clearly. Mr. Jian did not try forcing forgiveness from her. He simply accepted the silence. After a few seconds, he straightened again. "Take out your music sheets." The rehearsal finally began, though the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Students played carefully while secretly glancing between Jian and Mr. Jian. Jian remained quiet through most of practice, but for the first time in days, her hands no longer trembled quite as much. Even so, she still refused to sit at the piano. Mr. Jian noticed immediately but chose not to pressure her. Instead, he quietly observed her throughout rehearsal. The sadness remained there, deep and heavy, but now he could finally see it clearly instead of judging it. After school ended, students slowly packed their bags and headed home. Jian stayed behind longer than usual to organize sheet music. She hoped avoiding crowds would also help her avoid awkward conversations. As she reached for her bag, Mr. Jian approached carefully. "Jian." She looked up cautiously. "I'd like to discuss the concert." Immediately her expression became tense again. "I don't want to perform," she answered quickly. Mr. Jian nodded slowly, almost as if he expected that response. "Can you at least hear me out?" Jian hesitated before giving a small nod. Mr. Jian glanced toward the piano. "That composition you wrote," he began carefully. "It deserves to be heard." Jian's eyes widened slightly. "No," she whispered almost immediately. "Why not?" "Because it's personal." Mr. Jian remained quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, "Sometimes personal music reaches people the most." Jian looked away. "You don't understand." "I think I'm starting to." The room fell silent again. Jian clutched her notebook tightly against her chest. "It's not finished anyway," she murmured. Mr. Jian gave a small glance toward the piano. "Every song carries unfinished feelings." Those words surprised even him a little. A week earlier, he never would have said something like that aloud. Jian noticed the difference too, though she still did not fully trust it. "I can't play it in front of people," she whispered. "Not after what happened." Pain crossed Mr. Jian's face briefly. "I know." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Jian quietly bowed and left the room before the conversation could continue further. Mr. Jian watched the doorway after she disappeared. He understood now that apologies alone could not erase pain. Trust took longer. That evening, the school's concert committee gathered in the main office to finalize the youth performance schedule. Several teachers sat around a long table reviewing music selections while discussing which students would represent the school. Mr. Jian arrived carrying folders beneath one arm. "The orchestra program is nearly finalized," one teacher said. "We just need approval for the piano solo section." Another teacher nodded. "The competition piece from last year should work again." Mr. Jian sat down quietly. Then he spoke. "I want to change the program." Several teachers looked up immediately. "The concert is in less than 3 weeks," one of them replied. "What exactly do you want to change?" Mr. Jian placed a music notebook carefully onto the table. "We'll perform this composition instead." The teachers exchanged confused looks while flipping through the handwritten pages. "Who wrote this?" someone asked. "One of my students." A few moments passed while they studied the music. "It's beautiful," an older teacher admitted softly. "But unknown," another replied quickly. "This concert affects school rankings. We can't gamble on emotional student compositions." Mr. Jian's expression hardened slightly. "This is better than half the competition material we've used for years." "But the audience expects polished classics," someone argued. Mr. Jian looked around the table calmly. "No," he said quietly. "Audiences remember honesty." The room became silent for a moment. Finally, the principal spoke carefully. "And the student?" Mr. Jian hesitated. "She hasn't agreed yet." Several teachers sighed immediately. "You're risking the entire performance on a student who may refuse to play?" Mr. Jian looked down at the notebook again. For years, he only cared about flawless performances and awards. But suddenly those things felt far less important. "This song matters," he said firmly. The meeting ended without a final decision. Later that night, Jian sat once again at the piano inside her apartment. The room glowed softly under warm lamplight while rain tapped gently outside. She stared at the unfinished composition resting in front of her. Mr. Jian's apology kept replaying in her mind. Part of her remained angry, but another part remembered something different in his voice today. Regret. Real regret. Slowly, Jian placed her fingers on the keys. The melody began softly once more. As she played, memories filled the room again. Her mother smiling while correcting small mistakes. Late-night practice sessions together. Warm laughter between songs. Then came the painful memories too. Hospital visits. Weekends. Final goodbyes. Jian's eyes filled with tears, but this time she did not stop playing. Far away, Mr. Jian sat alone in the dark music hall listening to an old recording of orchestra rehearsals through headphones. But eventually he turned it off. Instead, he quietly opened Jian's composition again. And for the first time in his career, he cared less about whether music sounded perfect, and more about whether it sounded true. The city concert arrived faster than anyone expected. For the past 2 weeks, the entire school had been busy preparing for the event. Students practiced late into the evenings. Teachers rushed through schedules and rehearsals. Posters for the Youth Music Festival hung across the hallways near the entrance. But despite all the excitement around campus, Jian still felt trapped between fear and uncertainty. She had finally agreed to perform her composition after days of hesitation, though even now she questioned whether she made the right decision. Every night before the concert, anxiety kept her awake. What if she cried again? What if she froze on stage? What if people laughed? Those fears followed her everywhere. On the morning of the performance, gray clouds covered the city sky while cold wind moved through the busy streets. Jian sat silently beside the bus window on the way to school, holding her music notebook tightly against her chest. Her father had left early for work but placed a small handwritten note near the apartment door before leaving. "No matter what happens tonight, your mom would already be proud of you." Jian read those words 3 times before leaving home. Now the folded note rested safely inside her coat pocket. When she arrived at school, students hurried through the hallways carrying instruments and garment bags. Nervous excitement filled the building. Minacio immediately ran toward Jian. "You came," she said with relief. Jian forced a small smile. "I said I would." Minacio studied her face carefully. "Did you sleep at all?" Jian laughed weakly for the first time in days. "Not really." Before Minacio could answer, Mr. Jian entered the hallway holding concert schedules. The students instantly became quieter. But unlike before, the fear around him felt different now. The sharp coldness in his expression had softened over recent weeks. His eyes landed on Jian. "You'll rehearse once before we leave," he said calmly. Jian nodded nervously. A few minutes later, the orchestra gathered inside the music hall for final practice before the concert. The large room buzzed with nervous energy. Some students stretched their fingers while others quietly repeated difficult sections. Jian sat alone at the piano bench staring at the keys. Her heartbeat felt too fast. Mr. Jian stood beside the orchestra with folded arms. "We'll run the piece one last time," he announced. "Focus." The room became silent. Jian slowly placed her fingers on the piano. For a second, fear almost stopped her completely. Then she remembered her mother's voice. Music should tell the truth. Jian closed her eyes briefly and began playing. The melody filled the room softly. This time, nobody interrupted. Nobody judged. The orchestra carefully joined behind her while the composition slowly grew stronger. Every section carried emotion through the hall. Some students looked surprised hearing the full arrangement for the first time. Even the teachers standing near the back listened quietly. When the final note faded away, silence remained for several seconds. Then Minacio whispered softly, "That was beautiful." Several students nodded in agreement. Jian lowered her eyes shyly, still nervous but slightly calmer now. Mr. Jian looked toward the orchestra. "We leave in 30 minutes, he said firmly. "Get ready." But inside, even he felt emotional hearing the completed performance. The concert venue stood in the center of the city, surrounded by glowing lights and crowded streets. Large banners welcomed schools from across the district, while students hurried through the entrance carrying instruments. Inside the auditorium, workers adjusted stage lights while parents and judges slowly filled the seats. Jian froze slightly when she first saw the massive crowd. Hundreds of people. Her breathing immediately became shallow again. "I can't do this," she whispered suddenly. Minacio looked worried. "Jian." But Jian already stepped backward away from the stage entrance. Panic spread across her face. Her hands shook violently around the music notebook. Mr. Jian noticed immediately and walked toward her. "Jian." She looked up at him helplessly. "There are too many people." Her voice sounded close to breaking. "I'll mess everything up." Mr. Jian remained quiet for a moment. Then, very gently, he spoke words none of the students expected to hear from him. "When I was younger," he said slowly, "I was terrified of audiences too." Jian blinked in surprise. Mr. Jian gave a small tired smile. "I just became good at hiding it." The noise backstage faded around them for a moment. Mr. Jian looked directly at her. "You do not have to play perfectly tonight." Jian stared at him silently. "You only have to play honestly." Those words settled deeply inside her. For years, Mr. Jian only demanded perfection. Now he was asking for truth instead. Jian slowly looked down at the notebook in her hands. Then she took a deep breath. A stage worker suddenly appeared nearby. 5 minutes until performance. The orchestra members quietly moved into position backstage while audience noise echoed through the giant hall. Jian's legs still felt weak as she walked toward the stage entrance. She could hear people talking beyond the curtains. Judges, parents, teachers, strangers. Her heart pounded louder with every step. Then the lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium. "Next performance, Hanul Art School Orchestra, featuring original piano composition by student Jian. Soft applause followed. Jian stood frozen near the curtains for one final second. Then Mr. Jian quietly stepped beside her. He did not speak loudly. He only said one sentence. "Your mother is already listening." Jian's eyes filled with tears instantly. But this time she did not run away. Slowly, she walked onto the stage. The bright lights almost blinded her at first. Hundreds of faces stared toward the piano in silence. The huge auditorium suddenly felt impossibly large. Jian sat carefully at the piano bench. Her hands trembled slightly above the keys. In the audience, her father watched nervously from the middle rows. He looked exhausted after rushing directly from work, but pride filled his eyes the moment he saw his daughter on stage. Backstage, Mr. Jian stood quietly near the curtain. The room fell completely silent. Jian inhaled slowly. Then her fingers touched the keys. The first notes floated softly through the hall. Warm, gentle, emotional. The audience immediately grew still. Jian kept playing. As the melody continued, memories filled her heart again. Her mother humming in the kitchen. Hospital windows covered in rain. Late-night practice sessions together. Weak smiles during painful days. Every emotion she could never explain with words flowed through the music instead. Soon the orchestra joined behind her, surrounding the piano with soft strings and emotional harmonies. The entire hall became completely absorbed in the performance. Some audience members closed their eyes while listening. Others stared silently toward the stage. Even the judges stopped writing notes. The composition felt deeply personal, yet somehow everyone understood the emotion behind it. Jian no longer noticed the crowd anymore. She only focused on the music. And somewhere inside that melody, she felt close to her mother again. Halfway through the piece, one section became especially emotional. The piano sounded lonely there, almost like someone searching for another voice that could no longer answer. Jian's eyes filled with tears, but she continued playing. This time, the tears did not weaken her. They became part of the music itself. Backstage, Mr. Jian quietly lowered his head for a moment. He finally understood what real performance meant. Not flawless technique, not perfect control, but courage. The courage to let people hear your pain honestly. As the final section approached, the orchestra gradually softened until only Jian's piano remained once more. The last melody sounded fragile but peaceful, almost like a goodbye. Jian played the final note gently. Then silence filled the auditorium. For one long second, nobody moved. Then suddenly applause exploded through the hall. People stood from their seats almost immediately. Some audience members wiped tears from their eyes openly. Others clapped harder than they had all night. Jian looked shocked by the reaction. Her hands still rested on the piano keys while emotion overwhelmed her completely. In the audience, her father quietly covered his mouth while tears rolled down his face. Backstage, even several orchestra students cried softly. Mr. Jian remained standing near the curtain, staring toward the stage silently. He felt proud of Jian. But more than that, he felt grateful, because through one grieving girl and one unfinished song, he had finally remembered what music was truly meant to do. The applause inside the concert hall continued long after Jian finished playing. People remained standing while the final piano note still seemed to hang softly in the air. Some audience members wiped tears from their faces while others clapped harder than before. Jian sat frozen at the piano bench for a few seconds. She had imagined many possible endings to this night. Embarrassment, failure, silence, but never this. The bright stage lights blurred slightly through the tears in her eyes. Her hands still trembled gently above the piano keys as she slowly stood from the bench. The orchestra members behind her smiled proudly. Minicio gave her a small thumbs up while trying not to cry herself. Jian bowed nervously toward the audience. The applause only grew louder. Backstage, Mr. Jian watched quietly near the curtains. He did not clap immediately like everyone else. Instead, he simply stood there with emotion resting heavily in his chest. For years he believed emotional performances lacked discipline. Tonight, one grieving girl proved him wrong in front of an entire auditorium. As Jian walked off stage, her father rushed toward her from the side hallway near the backstage entrance. Before she could say anything, he pulled her into a tight hug. "You were incredible," he whispered emotionally. Jian finally broke down, crying fully against his shoulder. Not from sadness this time. Not completely. Felt more like months of pain finally escaping all at once. "I thought I would mess up," she whispered through tears. Her father gently smiled. "Your mother would never stop talking about this night." Jian lowered her head while trying to calm herself. Nearby, orchestra students surrounded her with excited voices. "That was beautiful. I almost cried during the middle part. I've never heard anything like that before." Jian became shy under so much attention, but for the first time in a very long while, she no longer felt invisible. Even teachers from other schools approached to compliment the composition. One older judge shook her father's hand and quietly said, "That music came from somewhere very real." Mr. Jian stood slightly farther away, watching everything silently. Eventually Jian noticed him. For a moment, both simply looked at each other across the crowded backstage room. Then Mr. Jian slowly walked closer. "You played well," he said quietly. Jian gave a small nervous nod. "Thank you." Mr. Jian hesitated briefly before speaking again. "No," he corrected softly. "Thank you." Jian looked surprised. Mr. Jian glanced toward the stage where applause still echoed faintly from the audience outside. "You reminded me what music is supposed to be." For a second, Jian did not know how to respond. But somehow, hearing those words mattered more than winning any award. Later that night, the school bus ride home felt completely different from previous weeks. Students laughed loudly while replaying moments from the concert on their phones. Several people gathered around Jian showing clips they recorded during her performance. "Look at the audience standing up," Minicio said excitedly. Jian watched the shaky video quietly. Hearing the music again made emotions return instantly. But this time, alongside the sadness, there was something else too. Peace. When she finally returned home with her father, exhaustion hit her immediately. Yet before going to bed, Jian walked toward the piano one more time. The apartment no longer felt as heavy as before. She touched the framed photo of her mother gently. "We finished it," she whispered softly. Outside, rain began falling lightly again, just like the night she first cried during rehearsal. But now the sound no longer felt lonely. The next morning, Jian woke up to non-stop phone notifications. At first she thought something was wrong. Then she saw dozens of messages from classmates and strangers. Someone had uploaded her concert performance online overnight. The video was spreading quickly across social media. By afternoon, thousands of people had already watched it. Comments filled every post. "I cried listening to this. You can feel her emotions through every note. This reminded me of my own mother. I lost someone recently too. This music helped me tonight." Jian stared at the screen in disbelief. People from different cities and even different countries were sharing the performance. Some talked about grief. Some talked about family. Others simply thanked her for the music. Her father looked equally shocked while reading the comments beside her at the kitchen table. "I don't think people are just hearing the piano," he said quietly. "I think they're hearing your heart." Within days, local news pages began mentioning the performance online. Short clips spread everywhere. More people searched for the full video each hour. At school, students stopped Jian constantly in the hallways. Some congratulated her. Others shyly admitted the performance made them cry. Even students she barely knew smiled at her now. The attention still felt overwhelming sometimes, but little by little Jian started opening up again. She laughed more, talked more, and for the first time since her mother's passing, she no longer rushed through each day only trying to survive. Meanwhile, Mr. Jian changed too. Students noticed it slowly at first. His lessons became calmer. He still cared about discipline, but the harsh coldness in his teaching faded away. One afternoon during rehearsal, a younger student became frustrated after making repeated mistakes and nearly started crying. Months earlier, Mr. Jian would have criticized him sharply. Instead, he quietly walked over and said, "Take a breath. Music isn't about being fearless. It's about continuing even when you are afraid." The entire room stared at him in surprise. Minacio almost smiled to herself. Jian noticed the change too. Sometimes during practice, she caught Mr. Jian listening to students more carefully now. Not only for correct notes, but for emotion behind them. One evening after school, Jian remained alone in the music room practicing softly. Sunset light poured through the windows while empty chairs surrounded the piano. Mr. Jian entered quietly carrying several papers. "There's something I need to show you," he said. Jian looked up curiously. He handed her a letter. At the top was the logo of a National Youth Music Foundation. Jian blinked in confusion while reading. "They saw the performance online," Mr. Jian explained. "They want to invite you to perform at a special concert next month." Jian's eyes widened immediately. The event was dedicated to families affected by illness and loss. "They specifically requested your composition," Mr. Jian added gently. Jian looked overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that." Mr. Jian nodded slightly. "That decision is yours." She looked down at the letter again. Part of her still feared standing before crowds. But another part remembered all the online comments from strangers who found comfort in her music. Maybe the song no longer belonged only to her grief anymore. Maybe it could help others too. A few days later, Jian visited her mother's grave with her father for the first time since the concert. Cold wind moved softly through the quiet cemetery while fallen leaves covered the ground. Jian carried a small speaker and her composition notebook carefully in her hands. Her father stood nearby silently while she knelt beside the grave. For a moment, she simply stared at her mother's name engraved in stone. Then she pressed play on the speaker. Soft piano music filled the quiet air. The same melody her mother once started writing beside hospital windows. The same melody Jian finished through tears and loneliness. Now it sounded different somehow. Still emotional. Still painful. But no longer broken. As the music played, Jian closed her eyes. And for the first time in nearly a year, she smiled peacefully instead of crying. "I think people needed your song," she whispered softly. Wind moved gently through the trees around her. Her father quietly rested one hand on her shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. They simply listened together. Far away, the city continued moving loudly as always. But in that quiet moment beside the music and memories, Jian finally understood something her mother once tried teaching her long ago. Pain never fully disappears. But sometimes, if shared honestly, it can become something beautiful enough to help other people heal too.